This story is about Ethan Cole, a 42-year-old forest ranger working in the deep woods of northern Montana. Ethan had been working there for years and saw the area as his home. In fact, most nights when no one else wanted to go on patrol, he was always the volunteer. "The forest is beautiful at night," he would say. "As long as you respect it, it won't scare you." But that night, the forest was quieter than it had ever been. It was a cold evening on November 14th. At 10:30 p.m., he left the station and began his standard patrol. The route was always the same: the lakeside, the North Trail, the old fire lookout tower, then back. Normally, it took 2 hours, but that night, Ethan did not return. At 1:10 a.m., a muffled sound came through the radio. The message was unclear. It wasn't obvious whether the background noise was wind or something else. Only one word could be understood: "Above." Then a burst of heavy static and something like a scream followed. The two officers at the station were certain the voice belonged to Ethan. They tried to respond immediately, but no reply came. A small search team was formed, but at first nothing unusual was found on Ethan's patrol route. No fallen trees, no tracks, no signs of an attack. It was as if the man had evaporated into the forest. Until they reached the North Trail, Ethan's flashlight was found lying on the side of the path. It had fallen onto a bed of pine needles, as if dropped in a hurry. It was still on, but flickering slightly, as though something had struck it and knocked it loose. Next to it in the soil was a single footprint. Yes, one single footprint. The other was missing. It belonged to a human, but it was deeper than normal, as if Ethan had been carrying an unusually heavy weight. A little further ahead, the trail split in two. The regular patrol route was the left fork, but the footprint led to the right, into a darker, unused section of the forest. That area had been closed for years. The density of the trees made it dangerous and almost inaccessible. Still, the team decided to follow the tracks. The prints continued for only 20 meters. Then they suddenly vanished. The ground was perfectly smooth. Even the grass at the spot where the prints ended was untouched. Everyone standing there felt the same thing. Something had lifted Ethan upward. At that moment, a metallic sound echoed between the trees. Thin, high-pitched, the kind of scraping noise the wind shouldn't have been able to carry. The sky was completely covered. No stars, no moon. But that sound repeated again and again. One of the team members whispered, "That's not the wind." Everyone was uneasy, but they didn't want to abandon the search. Then something unexpected happened. All their radios transmitted the same sentence at the same moment. The voice sounded like Ethan's, but with a strange, muffled, distant tone. "I'm not here." The sentence repeated once more, then cut off entirely. The team leader ordered everyone to turn off their radios. Just then, a light rose from deep within the trail. And that was the moment the search team was forced to turn back. The search team managed to move only a few steps toward the direction where the light had risen. Because the light was not like a normal camp lantern, it flickered, expanded, and contracted, and its color kept changing. Sometimes it was yellow, and sometimes it shifted almost to blue. And the source of the light was not on the ground. It was hanging about 4 meters up in the trees. Mark from the team said involuntarily, "Give me the binoculars." But no one moved. Because at that exact moment, a sound echoed through the forest that made all of their hair stand on end. It wasn't a whisper this time, nor an animal sound. It sounded human, like the strained breathing of a man in pain, but with an unnatural gap between each breath, as if he didn't have lungs. Then something emerged from the darkness beneath the light. A silhouette, human-like, but far too tall and unnaturally thin. It stood well over 2 meters. Its body leaned forward slightly. Its arms hung away from its torso, as if it were carrying something. When Mark lifted the binoculars, he narrowed his eyes, then suddenly jerked back a step. That's not Ethan," he said. His voice trembled. Or at least, not anymore. They couldn't move any closer, because just then, the light went out. The silhouette vanished instantly. There was no running sound, no rustle of leaves, nothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed all sound at once. By the team leader's order, they retreated. No further search was conducted that night. The next morning, a larger crew was sent to the area, but there was no trace of the light the previous team had seen. No footprints, no broken branches, not even disturbed soil where the silhouette had appeared. It was as if everything that happened that night was a secret the forest itself had hidden away. But the strangest detail about the disappearance was found that same day. Ethan's radio was discovered far off his route, right in the middle of the muddy ground of the restricted zone. There was not a single scratch on it, but the battery had been completely removed. The odd part, the radio's battery wasn't something that could be taken out by hand. You needed a special screwdriver to remove it. Ethan didn't have one. Neither did the search team. So how had the battery been removed? The final sentence written in the incident report seemed to summarize why the case is still open today. Ethan Cole's disappearance does not correspond to any known natural, animal, or human-caused category. Ethan was never heard from again. Not by the lake, not on the trail, not near the lookout tower. He left no trace. Only a lit flashlight, a half-spoken sentence, and a beam of light rising out of the night remained. When Mark tells the story of that night, he always hesitates at the same moment. When I saw it, its face wasn't turned toward us, but somehow I knew its eyes were seeing us. And perhaps the most disturbing part of this story is this: the area where Ethan disappeared is still closed to the public. Yet from time to time, local residents say they hear the same voice coming from deep within the forest. Those 3 words. I'm not here. This story is about Lena Hart, a radio operator pulling the night shift at a small station tucked between the mountains. The same region where Ethan would disappear a year later, meaning the voice heard that night might have been the beginning of everything Lena had worked night shifts for years. She was the kind of person who couldn't function without coffee and organized her files by color. During the winter months, especially on weeknights, things were usually very quiet. A few weather reports, the occasional road closure notice, and rarely a missing camper alert. That was it, and that night was as ordinary as any other. At 1:47 a.m., while Lena was half asleep and scribbling meaningless lines in her notebook, a faint static rose from the radio. She was used to this kind of interference. Mountainous region, cold weather. The lines acted up sometimes. She reached out to turn the volume down, but then she noticed something inside the static A breathing sound. She adjusted her headset and straightened in her chair. For a few seconds, all she heard was crackling frequency, and that muffled breathing, as if someone had leaned very close to the microphone but didn't dare speak. Lena moved closer to the radio and spoke in a calm voice. This is North Point Ranger Station. Who is calling? Please state your location. No answer came for a while, only breathing. Then something resembling a whisper, sentences she couldn't fully make out, slipped through. The voice sounded both extremely close and strangely far, as if it were echoing from two places at once. Goosebumps crawled up Lena's arms. She managed to pick out only a few words. Help. Above. Don't you see? Repeat, please, she said. Tell me who you are and where you are, we'll send help. This time something clearer came through, but it wasn't reassuring at all. The voice, distorted and fractured, said, I can't see me either. Then, with a sharp metallic screech, the frequency burst, a crackle so loud she had to yank the headset off. For a moment, the device went completely silent. The signal indicator on the screen was flashing wildly, then dropping to 0. Lena put on her backup headset and switched to the alternate frequency, checking if the same voice was bleeding through another channel. She knew every line used by the Rangers by heart, but the call she had just heard didn't belong to any registered channel. It came from somewhere, between the frequencies, as if from a dead channel. Still, by protocol, she contacted every Ranger currently on patrol. Unit 3, status report. Unit 5, location check. All of them responded calmly. Normally, no one had called for help. Officially, no distress call had been received that night, but Lena could feel the cold sweat under her headset because the last sentence from that voice was still echoing in her mind. I can't see me either. A few minutes later, the radio sprang to life again. This time, only one word came through. Strained, as if someone's throat had been torn. Above. And at that exact moment, every light in the station flickered for 1 second. What happened after that made Lena realize she wasn't alone in the station that night. The lights flickering off for a split second and turning back on made Lena's heart race. But she didn't let herself lose control. The station was old. The wiring acted up every winter. That's what she told herself, though the uneasiness in her chest refused to settle. Because at the exact moment the lights flickered, a short message appeared on the radio screen. 3, 2, 1. By the time Lena leaned closer, the message had already vanished. The radio was completely silent. They're definitely messing with me, she thought. But she knew none of the other station staff would bother with something like this. And when she checked the device memory to review the log, there was no trace of the countdown message at all. Just then, a sound came from outside the window, a tap, then another, as if someone were gently knocking on the glass at steady intervals, peering inside. The outside of the station was pitch black, even the moon wasn't visible. When she looked out the window, she could only see the silhouette of the forest. Still, she expected a shadow, a movement, something, but there was nothing. The radio crackled again. Lena instinctively put the headset back on. This time, after the breathing sounds, she heard a deep choking noise. Then the same whispering voice, similar to before but even more desperate, said, "They're taking me up." Lena's throat tightened. "Who is taking you? What is your location? Respond!" Her voice trembled, even though she knew she wouldn't get an answer. The radio remained silent for a few seconds. Then something strange happened. The same voice returned, but this time much clearer, much closer. "You hear me. Because you're there too." Lena jerked back as if her breath had been cut off. "What do you mean? Where am I?" At that moment, every window in the station creaked at once. There was no wind. Even the trees outside weren't moving, but it felt as if some invisible pressure wave was pushing against the glass from outside. Lena stepped back in fear. The radio came alive again, and this time there was a scream, a human scream, but echoed as if coming from the deepest part of a tunnel. Then everything stopped at once. The static ended. The breaths vanished. The windows grew still. And finally, in a whisper, thin as a child's voice, she heard, "I'm not here." Right after that, the radio shut down completely. The signal light went off and the device went dark as if it had reset. No matter what Lena tried, it wouldn't turn back on. The next morning when she filed her report, she was told that none of the patrol units had sent a distress call during the night. And when the station's security cameras were reviewed, they found something even stranger. At the exact minute Lena claimed she heard the second message, all the cameras went black simultaneously. The cameras had gone blind for 3 full seconds. And there was no footage of what happened during that time. Lena still can't stop thinking about the last sentence she heard. "You're there too." But more than that, she wonders, when that voice spoke, was it really coming from someone? Or had it come from a void that belonged to no one at all? This incident is based on a strange night in Redwood National Park, a night that is still marked as unexplained in official records. At the center of the story is 29-year-old forest ranger Caleb Foster. He was one of the youngest at the station, but his seriousness and attention to detail had earned everyone's trust. He was especially obsessive about camera footage, almost to a fault. "The forest acts like a different creature at night," he would say. "Everything you can't see might be watching you." That night, he was on duty in the camera room. The wind was strong. The treetops scraped against one another, and the station's old roof creaked softly. At 12:18 a.m., the feed from Camera 4, the one watching the North Patrol Road, suddenly began to shake. That sometimes happened when the signal was weak, but this time the vibration wasn't normal. It looked as if someone were lightly shaking the camera itself. Caleb fixed his eyes on the screen. The tremor lasted a few seconds, then the feed went completely black. Inside the darkness, a faint, muffled hum could be heard. Caleb quickly checked the other cameras. All perfectly normal. Only Camera 4 refused to come back online. Just as he prepared to pull up a new recording, the feed returned. But something was wrong. The camera angle, which should have been centered on the middle of the road, now seemed shifted slightly to the right, as if someone had physically turned the camera by hand. Impossible. The camera was bolted to the pole. Caleb stepped closer, leaning in for a better look. And in the lower right corner of the screen, he saw movement. A dark figure was slowly approaching the frame. Its footsteps could not be heard, yet the tree branches on screen swayed gently, as if something pushing air was moving through them. The silhouette was tall, taller than any human. Its body was unnaturally thin, shoulders narrow, arms hanging down almost to its knees. At first, Caleb thought it might be a bear or a fallen tree trunk. Optical illusions on forest cameras were common, but as the figure took a few more steps, human-like outlines began to take shape. Except, it didn't resemble any normal human. Its chest barely moved. It didn't look like it was breathing at all. Its walk was strange, gliding slightly over the ground without fully placing its feet. In an instant, Caleb remembered the rumors about Ethan's disappearance back then. People whispered about tall shadows caught on night cameras, though the official reports never confirmed anything. Suddenly, the silhouette stopped, and then it slowly lifted its head, just like a person looking up at a camera. Where its eyes should have been, there was only darkness. But within that empty void, Caleb felt, unmistakably, that it was looking straight into the lens. At that moment, the camera's microphone captured a sound. Not clear, filled with static, but undeniably resembling a whisper. It sounded human, but echoed as if coming from very far away. Then the silhouette dropped something that had been dangling beside its leg. A small piece of fabric. Caleb zoomed in on the image. His breath hitched. It was the cuff of a ranger uniform. The exact fabric type mentioned in the reports of the 4 missing personnel. And just a few seconds later, as the silhouette exited the frame, the camera went dark again. This time for much longer. Camera 4 remained dark for exactly 38 seconds. During that time, the only thing Caleb could hear was a low-frequency hum coming from inside the device, as if the camera were being forced to transmit a signal far beyond its normal range, straining to reach something it wasn't built to reach. At last, the feed abruptly returned, but the frame was completely different. The camera was now tilted downward, staring at the ground. A camera that was supposed to be fixed with a rigid metal plate could not possibly have bent this far on its own. At the bottom of the frame, among fallen leaves, lay the same fabric scraps seen moments earlier. But the truly disturbing detail was in the upper left corner of the screen, a dark shadow standing extremely close to the lens. It was the shadow of a face, but it wasn't round like a human face. It looked more like the silhouette of a long, narrow mask. The eye sockets were much deeper than they should have been, dark pits that swallowed every bit of light. Caleb instinctively slid back in his chair. The shadow wasn't moving. It just stood there, as though someone were looking directly into the camera room. Then the image began to tremble again. But this time the shaking wasn't mechanical. The camera wasn't malfunctioning. The footage itself rippled like a sheet being pulled by invisible hands, and then the microphone activated. What came through wasn't a whisper this time, but something like 2 voices speaking over each other. One very deep, one very high, yet both repeating the same sentence. "Don't stay here." For a moment, Caleb wanted to leap from his chair and run for the door, but his legs felt like they were glued to the floor. He couldn't look away from the screen, because the shadow had begun to move. Slowly, painfully slowly, it slid across the lens and drifted downward out of the frame. And as it disappeared, a detail flashed for a single moment in the corner of the camera feed. 2 long fingers. As if gripping the metal pole of the camera and pulling themselves downward, Caleb panicked and slammed the alarm button. The radio room lights turned red, and nearby ranger teams rushed to the building. When they entered the room, Caleb was still staring at the screen, breathing heavily. But the camera feed was perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened. The team immediately headed to camera 4. There was no damage to the pole. The camera was intact. And the recorded footage, corrupted. Nothing but a black screen and a few seconds of static. No silhouette, no fabric scrap, no strange face. Not a single trace. But early the next morning, something was found. Right beneath the camera pole, pressed into the soil, was a single footprint. deep, long, and far too large for any human. The most terrifying part was this. The soil beneath the footprint was pushed upward, as if something hadn't stepped down from above, but had pressed its way up from underneath. Caleb never worked another night shift after that. In fact, he left the station entirely within weeks. And the last thing he said to his team, still written in the incident file, was this: "I don't believe that thing was a person. And the camera, I could feel it knew we were watching." There are certain things every forest ranger in the region knows: the job rules, the radio frequencies, the patrol routes. And then there are the older stories, the ones no one writes down, but everyone whispers about. The national park where Caleb had worked for years was no different. But there was one place he always made sure to avoid, a place not marked on maps, a place even the most experienced rangers spoke about in hushed tones while looking away. The narrow valley they all called the Forbidden Zone. Officially, the area wasn't closed. There were no signs saying "do not enter." But the trail leading toward it always appeared faint on maps. The signposts constantly went missing, and the GPS signal began glitching whenever someone got within a few meters of its borders. Caleb remembered stepping too close to the area once when he was a young ranger. What he never forgot was this: the forest, normally full of noise, fell completely silent. No birds, no wind, just a suffocating silence that clawed at his ears. Among the rangers, several old legends had been passed down for decades. Some called the valley the messenger of spirits. Others called it the pit of those who don't return. One of the oldest rangers, Old Tom, would sometimes tell stories by the campfire to anyone brave enough to listen during night shifts. According to Tom, a group of hunters who vanished in the 1970s had last been seen at the entrance of that valley. The only thing ever found was a compass stuck inside a bush, dirt stains on its edge. The compass needle didn't point north. It trembled constantly, always turning toward the valley. Another legend dated back to 1984. A camping family reported something walking very slowly around their tent late at night. When they returned home, they found their tent ropes had been untied and strange circular symbols carved into the soil. The family reported it, but no one took them seriously, just dismissed it as a panic attack playing tricks on them. For years, Caleb kept his distance from these stories. He always tried to find scientific explanations, rational excuses. But that attitude changed 2 weeks ago, because that night, during a routine patrol, his GPS glitched again. The screen suddenly went black and displayed only 2 words: "Turn back." And then, even with a full battery, the device shut itself off. When the GPS device shut off suddenly, a sharp strand of fear stabbed into Caleb's chest, though he refused to admit it to himself. He took a few deep breaths and tried turning the device back on, but it didn't respond at all. Normally, these devices didn't power down so easily, and certainly never froze while fully charged. Yet that night, every piece of equipment behaved as if someone unseen were controlling them from a distance. Caleb wanted to turn back, but when he looked toward the trail entrance, he noticed something had changed among the trees. The sign pointing to the path was facing a different direction, as if someone had turned it, assuming he wouldn't notice. The screws behind it were loosened. This wasn't something the wind could have done. A creeping unease rose inside him. He remembered something Tom once said: "The Forbidden Valley doesn't call you son, but if you've come too close, it doesn't want you leaving either." Caleb could now feel that silent pressure coming from the darkness with unsettling clarity, as if the forest were holding its breath, watching him. He took another step. The pine needles beneath his foot made no sound. That wasn't natural. Dry ground always crackled underfoot. Then, from the left, a rustle. Soft, but unmistakably like a human step. Caleb swung his flashlight toward it. The beam washed over tree trunks, their shadows stretching monstrously for an instant. But no one was there. Yet he could feel someone, deep in his bones. Just as he was about to pull back, something on the ground caught his eye. A small stack of stones among the pine branches. More accurately, a deliberate mark. 4 stones stacked neatly, the top one carved with a thin line. The symbol was identical to the ones found beside the tent of the camping family that vanished years ago. Caleb's skin prickled. These stones must have been placed recently. The moisture on them still hadn't dried. Caleb stepped back. A shadow slipped between the trees, too fast for his eyes to follow. But for a heartbeat, he thought he saw a tall silhouette watching him from between the trunks. In that instant, every rational explanation he had ever clung to fell apart. This wasn't just an old legend anymore. Something was there, and whatever it was, it seemed to be warning anyone who approached the valley. Caleb quickly decided to turn back. But the moment he stepped away, the forest's sound returned. A bird cry, a distant gust of wind. As if the second he crossed the boundary of the forbidden area, someone had flipped an invisible switch. The forest became normal again. When he returned to the station, he wanted to file a report about everything he'd seen. But old Tom leaned over his desk and whispered quietly, "Sometimes speaking about what you saw brings it back to you." There was an old, exhausted fear in Tom's eyes, one he'd carried for years. Caleb wrote nothing that night, but early the next morning a patrol unit found something at the entrance to the Forbidden Zone. A small message carved into the wet soil. Just one sentence. "Don't come back." This story took place at the beginning of winter, one of the quietest times in the forest. The sky wasn't fully dark yet, but the sun had long disappeared. The air temperature was just below freezing, and a thin layer of snow covered the ground. In this season, the forest's silence doesn't soothe you, it unsettles you. Snow swallows every sound. Even the faint crunch under your boots forces you to listen to your own breathing. That evening, Patrol Officer Mason Hale was doing a routine sweep along the northern route. Mason had been in the job for years and was skilled at reading nature, especially tracks on snow. To him, every track told a story. The melody of a deer herd, the route of a bear, the midnight hunt of a fox. But the tracks he found that evening had no story at all. After completing half the trail, Mason noticed a single file line of footprints in the snow. At first glance, they looked like normal human prints, but what immediately grabbed Mason's attention was the depth. Each footprint was pressed into the snow as if someone weighing 150 kilos had stepped there far too deep to belong to any normal human. He crouched to inspect them more closely. That's when he noticed the second strange detail. The tracks belonged to bare feet. Yes, a barefoot print, in freezing temperatures on open snow. Mason tried to calm himself with rational ideas. Maybe someone panicked and ran, lost their boots, he thought. But the third oddity in the tracks destroyed every possible explanation in an instant. The shape resembled a human foot, but the toes were extremely long and thin, almost like they had two joints each. One backward curving toe had also left a mark, something no human foot on Earth could produce. Mason's breathing quickened. For a moment he remembered the legend some campers mocked for years, the one about the long-toed creature. But he forced his focus back. On patrol, he had to stay realistic. The problem was this. The footprints led from the path straight into the forest, and Mason was required by protocol to follow them. He walked a few steps, tracing the prints. And with each step, he noticed something even stranger. The footprints moved in a perfectly straight line. A human walking would naturally step left-right in a slight zigzag pattern, but these prints continued forward as if made by a creature walking only on one foot, in a straight, impossibly precise path. Mason shone his flashlight directly onto the prints. Under the beam, they looked even more disturbing. The snow inside them seemed darker, shadowy, as if there were an empty space beneath, or as if something had moved under the snow. Then, at the point where the footprints ended, the snow sank slightly. As if someone, or something, was standing right there at that moment, a knot tightened in Mason's throat. He jerked the flashlight upward, aiming it into the darkness. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. Yet the snow was still trembling ever so slightly. Mason took a step toward the spot where the snow had sunken slightly, but his instincts stopped him. Years of working in the forest teach you certain things. When something is wrong, nature lets you feel it. And right now, the forest was waiting. Even the cold air felt motionless, as if the snowflakes themselves were waiting for permission to fall. Mason knelt down to inspect the indentation. This was where the tracks ended. It was as if the creature with those strange feet had suddenly lifted off the ground, or vanished entirely. Beyond the final footprint, the snow was too smooth, too perfect. There was no way someone had walked away from that spot. The prints simply stopped. This was something that should never happen in nature. Mason stood and pointed his flashlight deeper into the forest. The beam illuminated thick tree trunks, stretching and shrinking the shadows. But nothing moved. Still, every part of Mason's body screamed that something was watching him. Then, a sound. Very faint, like a sigh or a breath slicing through the cold air. He couldn't pinpoint where it came from. It seemed to rise from beneath the snow and from between the trees at the same time. He swept the flashlight left and right, but no matter where he looked, all he saw was a wall of darkness. Then, in the direction opposite the tracks, the direction Mason had come from, a new footprint appeared in the snow. Mason's heart nearly stopped because that footprint hadn't been there seconds before. The shape was identical. Long, thin toes, strange curves, a deep indentation. But the most terrifying part was the direction the new footprint was facing toward Mason. Something had moved behind him. He whipped the flashlight around, hands trembling. He didn't see anything clearly, but in the snow, within the shadow of the trees, he thought he saw a thin shape stretching and then fading away. The more he stared, the less certain he became. At this point, Mason didn't care about protocol. His instincts were screaming only one thing: turn back. He stepped backward, then again. But just as he was about to turn around, he noticed another mark beside the footprints. Something drawn into the snow. 2 parallel lines with a vertical line between them. He stared at it for 3 seconds athwart, and then it struck him. It was the same symbol seen on the stones in the Forbidden Zone. A sign. And he could feel, in a way he couldn't explain, that it was a message. Mason began to walk quickly. Then run! His breath steamed in the icy air. The snow cracked loudly under his boots. He did not look back, because he was certain that if he did, he would see something. When he returned to the station, his hands were shaking. He tried to write a report, but no sentence on the paper felt like it captured what he had experienced. In the end, he wrote only one line. The footprints weren't moving forward. They were coming back. The next morning, a patrol team went to the area Mason described. All they found was this: 3 of the strange footprints were still visible. The final one had been completely erased. And where Mason claimed he saw the symbol, the snow had melted, as if someone had pressed a warm hand into it. From that day on, rangers gave that trail a new name: the Path of Returning Footprints.